Now, you were working here when Americans first arrived back in 2016. Did you at the time understand the significance of the moment? Did you appreciate the implications it would have on the future?
I didn't know what the fuck was going on. You know, I never do, but this one really spun me out. You see, we'd never seen Americans here before. Most of the detainees here on Christmas Island or at the refugee camps over in Nauru, they'd typically come from the most burnt out, disease-ridden corners of the third world. So for me to suddenly see one day, on the North Beach checkpoint, right over there, a bunch of Americans, these middle-class Americans, fat fucking things with their hand phones and their bloody brand name clothing, for me to see them lining up and one by one cop the most vigorous, degradingly public cavity search you'd ever imagine, was certainly very funny, but also raised a few eyebrows amongst us guards at the compound. But soon this became a familiar sight and Americans completely overran our camps. Which, mind you, didn't bother the Muslims, it didn't bother the Hindus. I'll tell you why, because from the start we agreed that no American refugee would receive any special treatment. We don't discriminate here, right? We made sure they were treated just as any other human being was in our care. They were deprived of water, we withheld from them the identities of various violent rapists who shared their bathing facilities, etc, all that day one shit. But it didn't bother them. And this went on. And that's what always struck me, how content they were. Didn't know what they were running from. And my confusion one day boiled over into anger when I was taking a bunch of arrivals for induction. Now this bunch was looking particularly casual, and I thought I'd better remind them this wasn't fucking Disneyland. So I grabbed one of the kids who was close to me and I said, the kids are going to another camp. It's just down the road. About 2,000 miles that way. So cut off a lock of their hair now for a DNA test one day because fuck, we ain't gonna keep a record of them. You'd be lucky if you fucking recognise them after 3 years in this shithole. And the father of the child I was holding, he stepped forward with this steely look in his eyes. He says to me, 3 years? They promised us 4 years. And I said, what the fuck are you talking about? And he said, if Donald Trump gets 4 years, that's what we want here. I didn't read the newspapers, right? I didn't own a telly, didn't have one on the island. I knew the weather, but that's because I looked at the fucking sky. Everything else, forget about it. So I just turned to this bloke and I just said, what has that pruned up first-rate fucking shit cunt got to do with anything out here, mate? And then the child I was holding, still with a very firm grip, looked up over his shoulder and whispered, that's our president. And no one laughed. And my heart just sunk. We'd heard some real horror stories out here before, man. People escaping dictators who spread the seed of genocide and ethnic cleansing and all that stuff, but nothing like this before. Nothing this heavy. Hell, we'd had Americans rocking up of all social classes, not excluding the extremely wealthy and famous. This is the celebrity block I'm guarding right here today. You would have read about it, yes. Because when Trump put those restrictions on Muslims entering his country, he just as easily went and put restrictions on Americans getting out. And by that time he'd already built that fucking wall on the southern border of the US, which stopped all these citizens escaping into Mexico to seek greater opportunity and freedoms. It was all... That's what changed it, when the famous people came. We treated refugees like shit for years in Australia, no one gave a fuck. They'd commit suicide in the droves just to try and raise a fucking iota of awareness for their shitty conditions, and no one lifted a finger. But when Lindsay Lohan's in here, and she does one fucking tweet saying she's on a hunger strike because she doesn't get Wi-Fi in her cell, right, she wasn't on a hunger strike. The bitch is just Anno, right? But still, people listened, and for once they took the plight of the refugees seriously, and they discovered our violations against human rights went far beyond not providing clean and safe Wi-Fi access to inmates. And the only people left to guard here today are those poor souls who, under these conditions, suffered a mental illness in their time. Celebrity block here, no exception. Look at this poor bastard. Hey, Mr. Spielberg, away from the fence, please. Stephen, away from the fence. Tell you what, I loved his movies, but he's a real handful in here. He never attacks the same part of the fence twice. He's learning.